I think that, at this point we have a very good sense of the whole legacy behind the story, behind Satyajit Ray. As I said, the story began with Ram Mohan and his influence and the movement that he started, the Brahmo Samaj movement, that cleansed Hinduism of certain ills of that society. And I must say, I don't want to berate on Hinduism either. That's my faith. And I think that one of its greatest qualities, really, is that it lends itself open to reform more easily, because there are no books of revelations, no prophets, no words of God to argue with. It's a very much more sort of philosophical text, and I think the fact that Ram Mohan Rai was able to eradicate sati is because he was able to show that it was an absolute anachronism. So I don't mean to be berating Hinduism, but what I want to say is that at the time that Ram Mohan Rai lived, definitely, as Satyajit Ray puts it, it had become too benighted and overloaded with ritual superstition. And a whole new concept of humanity was emerging in Europe, as he puts it. And Ram Mohan Rai was able to bring some of that enlightenment to his benighted country. And then, of course, there was this towering personality of Rabindranath Tagore, who shaped modern India in many, many ways. And he is to us what Shakespeare would be to the English language, in that he arguably is the single greatest influence on the Bengali language and how it's spoken today. If you see BBC's interesting comical adaptation of Shakespeare's life, I'm digressing a little bit, it's called The Upstart Crow, and it's on BBC One, I think. So, and I have a UK proxy set up on my computer so I can see live feeds. But if you see it on iTunes, it makes in a humorous way, it shows how much of Shakespearean expressions we still use in day-to-day English language. I could say about the same thing about the usage of modern Bengali with Rabindranath. And then, of course, it comes down to Satyajit Ray.
How do you define, who is Shakespeare and Rabindranath? If I compare that, I say that Rabindranath is up a little bit than the Shakespeare.
No, I'm not saying that at all.
No.
I don't think you can make those kinds of comparisons. What I mean is, Shakespeare is to the English language.
He wrote only the drama, right?
No, I don't want to get into that. Of course, he wrote many other things. He wrote the sonnets. If you take the volume of output, definitely Rabindranath did more. But then Shakespeare was not living off of ancestral wealth. He restored the family's fortunes. His father, John Shakespeare, had very much become bankrupted. And Shakespeare was actually a paid actor in the Globe Theatre. He was on the pay of John Burbage, but he wrote these plays. So I don't want to make that sort of a comparison. It's not possible. Shakespeare lived in Tudor times, and Rabindranath lived in the 19th century, so 300 years later. What I mean to say is that Shakespeare is probably the single greatest influence on the English language. There is nobody even comparable to his stature. I would say Rabindranath's stature to the Bengali language is akin to that. I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to compare Shakespeare with Rabindranath. That would be absurd. But it's interesting, though, if you go to Stratford-upon-Avon, the house on Henley Street, there's a bust of only one other poet, rather than just William Shakespeare. There's only one other poet represented in Shakespeare's ancestral home. That's still very, very well maintained. And that poet is actually Rabindranath. So there is a bust of him in the Shakespeare house as one of the greatest admirers of Shakespeare. But I'm not a literary expert, so I can't do a proper comparison. But if you read, once again, Andrew Robinson's book, you'll see quite a bit more on that. I don't know, I probably not answered your question, but I don't think I can answer your question. So I'll get back to the subject of this film, and you'll see why seeing the two previous documentaries prepares you well to take in this particular story in its full implications. As I said, the story has autobiographical elements for the author, Rabindranath. He had strong common literary interests and a deep camaraderie with his beloved sister-in-law, Kadambari Devi, who in 1884 committed suicide after Rabindranath's marriage to his child bride. You know, you saw the picture of his with his wife Bhavatarini, as the documentary says. That name was changed to Mrinali. But it was very common back in those days that, you know, grown-up men would marry very young girls, but, you know, often in their pre-teens. That was not unusual. And so I don't know if that's coincidental or not. Kadambari, as the film says, was 2 years older than Rabindranath, but very close in his age, because his elder brother would be substantially older, and there used to be a big age gap between the wife and the husband back then. And often what would happen is that the wife would be about the same age range as a younger brother, and that led to certain interesting dynamics that I'm going to talk about a little bit here. So her death was the first tragedy in Tagore's life, and he wrote extensively about it. He never got over that. In fact, one of his elder brothers also died the same year, Hemendranath, and there's very little reference to this older brother. But there's an awful lot in many abstract ways about Kadambari. Andrew Robinson writes, that there seems hardly any doubt that it was she who inspired Rabindranath to write in 1901 Nostoni, which is the Bengali word for a broken nest, the novella on which Ray based Charulata. Okay, the film is called Charulata because that's the name of the character. And Tagore could not use the name Nostoni because another Bengali film had been made with that name. So he had to choose a different name, and it really stuck. And one of the books I have is a French translation of the story by Madame France Bhattacharya, which actually calls the novel Charulata. So that's been the impact of the film. It's no longer, the original title is almost forgotten. And so she in some ways resembled Charu, which was the shortened form of Charulata's name, and he Amol. Amol is, as you'll see, his sort of brother-in-law, cousin-in-law, so to speak. While his elder brother, Jyotirindranath, had much of the unworldliness and naivety of Bhupati. Bhupati is shown to be the husband of Charulata, who's a really decent man, but he's very caught up in the politics of the time. And like many people in the Victorian times in India who had been affected by the new progressive ideas and values, he was very much, his head was always in the clouds. So he could never see that he was effectively neglecting his wife, and the sort of camaraderie, or if you wish to call it amorousness, that was starting to develop between his cousin and his wife. And Ray had seen a very early manuscript by Tagore with marginalia, which refer many times to Hecate, who was the Greek goddess for the occult and witchcraft and so on. And this was Rabindranath's sort of jocular nickname for his sister-in-law. That's what he used to call her. And there is even a profile portrait sketch, which is obviously Kadambari's. In fact, Tagore even admitted to the artist Nandalal Bose. You saw him, it was one of the guys who was drawing pictures in the documentary, when he was in his late 70s, that it was Kadambari's eyes which lay behind the hundreds of haunting portraits of women that he painted in old age. As you saw, he took up painting very late in life, in his 70s. and he used to doodle, and he had a very unique way of correcting mistakes in his poems that all looked like a sort of floral pattern. But he really started to draw, and these pictures of women are not very anatomically accurate, but they leave you with a very haunting impression anyway. And some have argued, and I don't buy it, but some have argued that he was as great an artist as a poet. But the fact remains that he had some very successful exhibitions in Paris that were organized by many of his close disciples, shall I say. For example, the Argentinian poetess Victoria Ocampo. But the way he develops this theme, and I'm quite sure that the relationship Tagore had with Kadambari would not fit into what would be a modern notion of sort of consummated affair or adultery or anything of that nature, but it was pretty scandalous. There's just that deep friendship was enough to send tongues wagging. So, and there is in Bengali society still a bit of a discomfort accepting this story, this relationship between Charu and Amol that results from her being in such close proximity, having that sort of matching of wavelengths and personalities, and sort of her absentee husband. And it's the result of those dynamics. So Andrew Robinson quotes Satyajit Ray here. He's saying, "There is a Bengali convention about the relations between a wife and her debor, or the modern Bengali word is dawar, which is basically a brother-in-law, her younger brother-in-law. It's always been a very affectionate relationship, and she's free to come out before him, though not before other men." Now, these things are not India of 2018. This is, going back maybe 50 years. Things have radically changed now. But from that period where the film was made, the story that it relates, Rabindranath wrote it in 1901, but given the autobiographical nature of it, Satyajit Ray placed the story to about 1878, because there's a certain election of Gladstone in England, the Afghan War, etc., put it in that period, and also the sort of autobiographical element. So this sort of seclusion is no longer the reality today, but at the time that Satyajit Ray was making this film in the 60s, a lot of the vestiges of it would have remained. So when he's saying the brother-in-law might well be studying in college with lots of free time, making demands on her to cook certain foods. In fact, it goes even closer than that. It always verges on a kind of intimacy which is exactly as shown in Charulata, where the younger brother is attracted to the sister-in-law, but is afraid of going beyond a certain point. He realizes that the danger is there. So it creates a situation that is rather tense, and also pleasing for both characters. The pleasure is very much there because he has the sanction of the convention that he can mix with her, not with other women his age. And because there's also the elder sister-in-law, who would be called a Bodhi in Bengali, would also be somewhat of a maternal figure, though not 100%. It's a kind of like a twilight zone. So there is always the possibility that a relationship of a rather deep nature might develop. Even now, in comparatively orthodox Hindu households, the dowar is a very special figure from the wife's point of view. Although there is definitely not, within quotes, a powerful sexual bond, in quotes, between Amol and Charu, as one British critic has noted, there is a certain amorousness and a fairly controlled passion in Charu. It will invariably or inevitably mature if Amol stays, which is exactly why he doesn't. He leaves that family too, and things happen as a result that I don't want to give you a spoiler on that. So it's interesting that things that you've seen so far, especially Tagore's own life and his early literary forays that had a lot of input from Kadamburi, in this case Charulata, and you'll see that rivalry. You'll see that, you know, that she means well for him, but some of it comes out as in the shape of, you know, sort of tough love and harsh criticism. And she was a very strong personality and had tremendous talent herself. At another level, Madhavi, the lead actress in this film, or Madhabai, if you were to go with a beverage, had become the muse of the director himself. And his own wife had detected the competition. And I'm going to quote a passage from an interview. Madhavi had bad teeth, and she was also, this is Satyajit Ray telling the interviewer, and she was also addicted to eating pan. This is a better beef thing that a lot of Indians chew after dinner, and which destroys the gums over a long period, as well as staining the teeth black. I had to photograph her very carefully, not to show that side of her, recalled Ray. It's the lower set that are bad. I had to put the camera at a lowish angle, so that even when she spoke, the lower set of teeth wouldn't show. I suggested taking out her teeth, but the mother objected. It was too early for that. Madhavi was quite a bit younger than Satyajit Ray, maybe about 20 years. Was it a severe problem in shooting? The interviewer asks. Oh my God, in fact, my wife had serious objections to using Madhavi at all for her teeth. But I knew the camera could manage that, and Madhavi accepted that she would be filmed in this manner. In my humble opinion, it's quite a self-indulgent visual feast at times, all done very tastefully, you know, by Satyajit Ray, because his sort of Bengali Victorian mores wouldn't allow it to be anything vulgar. And he had started to man the camera himself by this time. As you saw in the very first documentary, he was saying that the last 3 films started to man their own camera. I'd seen this in 1968, and this film was made in 1964. And it appears to me, just one person's opinion, for what it's worth, and you may or may not agree with me, but it seems to your present interlocutor that he was quite smitten with her. It comes across in the way that she was filmed. It's also perhaps the most perfect film he ever made, and in many interviews he has mentioned that this film was his favorite. It is believed that a brief romance had blossomed between them, but Madhavi eventually called it off, out of her respect for Satyajit Ray's wife. And because there was so much, so much commentary about it in various circles, they made only one more film to come. And Madhavi in various writings explains why she stopped, because she didn't want to deal with the scandal that was ensuing. While it's not very clear where exactly it went, but you're talking about a very conservative society where, for location shooting on one of the films, he and Madhavi had gone together to this location, and it started to become a bit unbearable for her, and so she called it off. And in her more autobiographical writings, she has defended her decision not to make any more films, but she also expressed regret that certain distance had grown. But she said that Satyajit Ray was forever the thorough gentleman. He asked her many more times to make films with him, and she always refused. But he never tried to persuade or insist or anything. That was not his way of doing things. And so it's all this, to me, is a bit of a pity, because I wish there were more films in which they had acted together. And Andrew Robinson, in his second edition of the book, has referred to Madhavi as Ray's unrequited love. and that might very well be the case. But therefore, there are several sort of underlying threads to this film that I thought would be worthwhile to point out that may not be obvious by watching the film itself, but it embodies, Satyajit had said that film is a Western art form because it's a fixed pattern in time, and Indian art forms are always improvised. So he believed that his films were a certain sort of Indianization of this art form, but as in the theme, in the vein of a fixed pattern in time, I think it embodies two things. Rabindranath's own relationship with Kadamburi and its complexities, and also the director's own affection for his lead actress in this film, who had at the time definitely become his muse. So with those words, I will request that the projection be started. I took a little extra time to introduce this film to you, also because I won't be around when the film actually ends. But I hope you enjoy it, and thank you so very much for your attention to my very sometimes kind of meandering introductions to these works of art. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
আপনি ঢাকায় আছেন এবং বাংলাদেশের পরিস্থিতির দিকে আপনি নজর রাখছেন। বাংলাদেশে কোভিড-19 পরিস্থিতি এখন কেমন বলে আপনার মনে হচ্ছে?
কোভিড-19 এর ডেথ রেট গ্র্যাজুয়ালি ইনক্রিজিং ইন বাংলাদেশ, কারণ মাঝখানে আমরা কোয়ারেন্টাইন ওইভাবে মেনটেন করতে পারিনি, সেলফ কোয়ারেন্টাইন এবং কিংবা সোশ্যাল ডিস্টেন্সিং, যার ফলেই হয়তো আমাদের মৃত্যু হার বাড়ছে এবং ডিটেকশন লেভেলও বাড়ছে। তবে এই মুহূর্তে আমরা যদি আমরা লক আপটা উঠিয়ে ফেলি, তখন আমার মনে হচ্ছে যে আমরা একটা বড় রকমের ধাক্কা খেতে পারি, এবং সেটা মাধ্যমে আমরা একটা হার্ড ইমিউনিটিও হয়তো অর্জন করতে পারি, কিন্তু একটা ব্যাপক ক্ষয়ক্ষতির মাধ্যমে। কারণ